Hi, good afternoon, and welcome back to another year of CIO Leadership Live. I'm your host, Mary Fran Johnson, the CEO of Mary Fran Johnson Media, and a contributing columnist on CIO.com, where I write about boardroom and technology strategy issues. Twice a month, we produce CIO Leadership Live with the generous support of my friends at CIO.com and the CIO Executive Council. We're streaming live to you right now on LinkedIn and also on YouTube on our special channel there, IDG Tech Talk, and encourage you to sign up for that as well. We'll be watching for your questions on our live streams today, and one of our editors will be picking them out and passing them along so that we can pose them to our guest. And I'm very honored and privileged today to start off our New Year season with CIO Andre Mendez of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Andre stepped into the DOC top technology leadership job in April of 2020, just a few weeks into the global pandemic. His overall responsibilities and oversight include all the technology and operations for the Department of Commerce itself, plus 13 associated bureaus, which amounts to an annual budget of about $2.8 billion for 21, and overseeing the work of more than 100,000 employees and contractors. Some of those 13 bureaus that are part of the Department of Commerce are quite well known to most of us, such as the U.S. Census Bureau or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And prior to his current role, Andre served as CIO for one of those bureaus, the International Trade Administration, which is the one that manages all of our global trade issues for the United States. Before ITA, Andre spent 8 years with the U.S. Agency for Global Media in various executive roles. He was CEO, CFO, Chief Operations Officer, and of course, CIO and CTO. I've had the privilege of knowing Andre since his very first early days in IT leadership and business roles. He held various CXO positions, generally at the top of the technology stack, with companies and organizations such as the Special Olympics International, the Public Broadcasting System, and then in the private sector with several pharma and healthcare companies. And among the many honors that he has collected across an incredible multifaceted career are an MIT Award for IT Innovation and last year, induction into our very own CIO Hall of Fame. Andre, thanks so much for joining me here today. It's great to have you.
Oh, Mary Fran, it's always a pleasure. It's been a long relationship that has been incredibly rewarding.
Right.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Great. Well, I know our readers at CIO Magazine in the old days and then CIO.com and Computer World have always appreciated your perspectives on things. But before we get into some of the impressive technology things you have underway, let's put the work and the goals of the Department of Commerce into perspective for our viewers today. Tell us a few things that many Americans may not realize about the broad scope of the mission that you have under your operation now.
So you mentioned probably the two best known bureaus, the Census and NOAA, which everybody is familiar with. But there are a substantial number of other ones that have a in the development and nurturing of commerce, not only within the United States, but also across the globe. The U.S. Patent and Trade Office, for example, is a remarkable example of an organization that leads all of the patent and trademark issues and regulatory issues across the entire globe, and that is often imitated by all of the other countries because the model has been so successful. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, is the bureau that is responsible for putting out things as important as the gross domestic product, the GDP numbers, on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, which is of course an enormous driver of policy and also business and investment because it reflects the conditions, the economic conditions across the entire country. You mentioned ITA. And of course, trade being an enormous driver of economic activity and progress is front and center. And ITA has a long-standing practice of helping American businesses to operate abroad and to broaden the overall export markets, but also has a substantial role to play in terms of our imports and some of the issues associated with it, like, for example, the product dumping, price manipulations, which are very important to ensure that we operate in a market that is both very agile, but also very fair. And so, commerce, it really is a multifaceted operation across a variety of areas.
Well, I know you mentioned the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that it's a smaller bureau, but that GDP number, there is a lot of very sophisticated technology behind the timeliness that has. Tell us about that, what happens if it's a few seconds late?
Sure. So we operate in an environment where, investment firms, for example, spend an inordinate amount of money to ensure that they can operate as fast as possible. And when I'm talking about as fast as possible, I'm talking about hundreds of a second in terms of realizing trades and executing trades. And they spend an enormous amount of money in optimizing that technology. And so it is extremely important that when a bureau like BEA releases a number that is going to be scrutinized and acted upon from an investment standpoint, that would be absolutely timely, down to the second, because an enormous amount of subsequent events are going to take place after that are dependent on the publication of that number.
Yeah.
And so the exacting requirements for that timeliness are quite astonishing. But fortunately, they are well established, and they perform very, very well in that regard.
Yeah. Well, let's get next into some of the top technology, some of the top IT priorities that you have for the Department of Commerce today. How much did those shift up or down in terms of the importance scale during these very disruptive past 2 years?
Interestingly enough, the main objectives, the main strategic direction has changed very little. Okay. Before the onset of the pandemic, the Department of Commerce already had a very substantial investment in telework facilities. It was already part of a large number of bureaus' modus operandi. And also with some of them, because of their international components, they were effectively used to dealing with workforces that were spread all over the world. And so that remoteness was almost second nature. USPTO is a longstanding leader in terms of telework, not only in the federal government, but across all working environments. And so that was fairly seamless. We didn't have to pay a lot of attention to that and move away from all of the other vectors that we already had in place in terms of migration to cloud environments, in terms of cybersecurity improvements, including migration to zero trust architecture, which we had started with some of our bureaus, 2-3 years ago, and with some of them even longer ago. And also IT modernization. Yes. One of the quandaries in the federal government is effectively the amount of technical debt that we have had by virtue of budget issues, and so that those continue to be the main priorities that we are working on, in addition to workforce retention and retraining from legacy skill sets into the new environment and the new skill sets that are required going forward.
Well, and I think for especially for those of us who are outside of government organizations, the sheer complexity and unpredictability of the funding for your budgets makes it seem like especially from a technology leadership standpoint, it makes it seem like a challenge that's on a whole other level that the private sector doesn't have to deal with.
Yeah, it's, at any point in time, we are effectively dealing with 3 fiscal years, right? And often the delineation of the future fiscal years is dependent on the previous fiscal years. And those are not very clear. At this point right now, we're effectively operating in a continuing resolution, which has us at funding levels for fiscal year 21.
Okay.
We are waiting for the final budget for fiscal year 22. We've already put in our fiscal year 23 requests last summer, and currently we're working on our fiscal year 24 requirements. But of course, all of those are dependent on the previous numbers, some of which we do not know. So it is a challenge, but one that we have sort of to a certain degree grown accustomed to, and that we understand as we move past our calculations. And it's not as inflexible as everybody thinks when they're outside of the government, because there is an understanding on the part of Congress and OMB that the agencies are dealing with an ever-changing circumstance. And so we've seen situations where things change at a later date because everybody comes to an agreement that they need to.
Right. Well, and when we talked earlier, I was asking you a lot of questions about the complexities of being essentially the top CIO over 13 different bureaus. And when you came in early 2020, those 13 bureaus all had their own CIOs doing their own things, reporting to their own bureau leaders. What did you change? What sort of things did you do in terms of either restructuring or reorganizing? I know when I asked you about this, you had mentioned compliance and regulatory issues were very much on the top of your priority list, which was a little unexpected. I thought it might be other more kind of pedestrian CIO things, but it was compliance and regulation.
Well, the challenge with having a cadre of bureaus that are so diverse and some of them so large is that you cannot assume a completely centralized role and expect that you will have the agility necessary to move on a daily basis. And so it is extremely important that the CIOs that are at the bureaus are cognizant of that dichotomy between the Department of Commerce and the bureaus. And I think that they have understood that, and they've responded to the challenge associated with that, of making sure that they pay attention to all of their operational issues on a constant basis, that they map a strategy that is bureau specific, but that fits within a strategy that is department specific, and that provides some guidance overall in terms of technical direction. So I've issued a technical statement of direction when I first joined the Department of Commerce that basically laid out some high-level priorities for everybody. But then, Mary Fran, when it comes to this type of situation, it is the kind of situation where you cannot rule by fiat, right? You cannot make people do things because that will be extremely disruptive. So what you have to do is bring about an understanding of a shared agenda, an understanding of a shared desire to excel that can be best achieved by leveraging economies of scale, by helping each other, organize around, very joint objectives, let's say, and even leverage the strengths of certain bureaus to help other bureaus rather than having to depend on the Department of Commerce. I'll give you an example. NOAA has an internal organization that was necessitated by their geographic dispersion and massive bandwidth and networking needs called NWAVE. And they are an exceptional organization that operates on the very edge of high-speed networking and reliability. Well, it didn't make any sense for all these bureaus to be contracting services from the private sector vendors when we had this internal player that was just rooted in extreme technical and operational excellence. And so over the last 2 years or so, we have basically managed to migrate almost all of the bureaus into the NWAVE environment, right? Not only dramatically increasing our throughput, dramatically increasing our resilience and reliability, but also dramatically reducing costs. And so that is the type of collaborative environment that I've been trying to foster within the bureaus of the Department of Commerce so that we help each other achieve excellence by leveraging subject matter expertise and best practices from one bureau to another, and therefore achieve a joint and fast and rapid progress. And that has been very successful because we have a whole slew of new CIOs that have absolutely bought into that concept, that as far as I can tell, don't feel threatened by it, and therefore collaborate very openly.
Well, and for anyone who'd like to hear more about the inner workings of one of the bureaus, in November, one of our CIO Leadership Live guests was Jamie Holcomb, who is the CIO for the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, which is one of the bureaus under the Department of Commerce. I want you to talk a little bit, Andre, about there is a CIO council for the Department of Commerce, because you've got your operation as the Office of the Department of Commerce, and then there are the 13 bureaus, and you and all your CIOs get together regularly. But when you came in, you changed the way that meeting was operating, and I want you to talk about a little bit about that, because it became more of a collaborative organization from what you've told me so far.
Yeah, historically, it was very, inner focused in terms of what was happening at the Department of Commerce proper. And I think that what we've tried to do is highlight some of the happenings at the bureaus, highlight the progress made in joint efforts, and therefore create an environment where it was far more enticing for them to participate.
Yes.
And when I say participate, I mean fully participate, rather than just being on the phone call or the meeting. And so I think that has generated tremendous results. I think, when we faced a challenge with SolarWinds, and there was an opportunity for some additional funding for cybersecurity, we didn't follow the old model where we would get a portion of money and then, do a pro rata distribution throughout the bureaus, and they would go about and do their own thing. We created a cybersecurity task force composed of the CIOs and the best technical experts across the entire department. We brought them together and we charged them with creating a unified cybersecurity strategy for the Department of Commerce that would leverage a smaller number of platforms, common platforms, and that would allow us to generate economies of scale from a purchasing standpoint, but also from a training standpoint, and allowing us to leverage the expertise from various bureaus into the smaller bureaus, for example, so that they could benefit from a level of and capacity of problem solving that otherwise would be left to each one of them individually, creating challenges. Lord knows that the challenges that we face from the people who are trying to do us harm are enormous.
Yes,
and they are constant. And to have 13 different bureaus have their own siloed efforts to fight that and to resist the constant onslaught would be nonsense. And so with this shared approach, I think we're in a much better place to ensure the continuity of the work of the Department of Commerce, despite the constant avalanche of attempts.
Well, does it help in that effort that one of your bureaus is NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which basically wrote the standards for zero trust architecture?
It helps tremendously because we are always and constantly looking at the operational implementation versus the established and published best practices and standards associated with these efforts. And that keeps us in line because we want to make sure that we are a prime example of implementation of the standards that regulate or that direct the efforts across the entire federal government and the private sector.
Yeah.
And so that keeps us on our toes because they are not at all shy about letting us know when we are not following to the line the extraordinarily useful guidelines that NIST has put out.
Right. I often ask guests on this program to talk about the size and scope of the technology teams and how they may have essentially had to reorganize to cope with hybrid work or even remote work strategies. That's a very big question for you because there's 14 different departments basically involved here. But what can you tell us about do you have an overall policy, for instance, for hybrid work or return to hybrid work strategies. And I know this is hard for you because you're one of those in-person, likes to walk around and meet with people face to face. So I know this is difficult these days, but it's going on and on. So everybody's dealing with it. So talk about that, about the hybrid work strategies, and are they uniform across all the different bureaus and the Department of Commerce, or does everybody pick from a list of ways to approach it?
So, interesting that you bring that up, Mary Fran, because even this morning, we had a meeting to try to establish a common set of expectations and workarounds that would allow us to have as seamless as possible a hybrid working environment that would be conducive. And so, rather than letting everybody go about their way, we are trying to leverage those economies of scale for that as well. It has been challenging, no doubt. It's a different paradigm. Let me give you an example. I have CIOs that started over the last 2 years, right? That have never met their staff in person, right?
Right.
And while it is a little easier for folks that have been around for a long time, that have already established those interpersonal relationships to now operate in a remote environment, it is far more challenging for new individuals coming on board, assuming a leadership role, sometimes with hundreds of individuals under their aegis, and being able to establish that type of working relationship. And they have been remarkable at it. It's amazing how adaptive, the human species is at dealing with these new challenges, and then going about figuring out the way to work it out. Is it optimum? Of course not. Of course not. For me, it has been a tremendous challenge. But it's something that we have to deal with. And so it's an evolutionary pressure, so to speak, that has led to an evolution of the work environment and leadership styles across everybody in the federal sector, in the private sector, and in the Department of Commerce.
Yeah.
Not easy, but doable, obviously.
Yes. Well, and for a while I've been asking people, what are some of the changes in this remote working and hybrid work strategies? How has it changed the culture of the organization? And I kept asking that, assuming that, a month or two from now, we could go back to what the culture was like. But I think we've all accepted that train has moved on. So when you think about the way that the pandemic and all of the different challenges that have been going on for the last 2 years have been happening, how do you think the cultures of the department, the work culture of the Department of Commerce and of all the bureaus, how and where have they changed for the better? And what are some of the things that you hope we can leave behind us?
I think having a joint challenge, right, that applies to everybody is both a challenge, but also an opportunity, right? There are all kinds of people that actually thrived in this environment by virtue of their personality, right? They actually prefer this environment by virtue of their personality. And other people like me who have struggled with it. But the reality is that all jointly have faced the same challenge and had to react accordingly. So in a strange way, a crisis generates not only the need for change, but an opportunity to establish a partnership, to establish an esprit de corps, because we are all dealing with the same challenge. Because that challenge is not only in the work environment, but for the majority of the individuals out there in the workforce, the same challenge that they experience at home with their children being in remote learning, right? With their children not being able to socialize as much with their friends, with themselves in their personal life, not having that opportunity for going out for dinner in a weekend. And so there is an esprit de corps that comes from all being involved in a situation that is superciliar to all of us, and that as a result creates partners out of necessity.
Yes.
So culture-wise, I think that there will be an adaptation. But just like we adapted to the remote work, we will adapt to the hybrid work, and we will continue moving forward. That is what basically sets us apart from all of the other species, is a rapid adaptability to the challenges.
Well, and we also talked, I've been hearing a lot more often these days, I have conversations with CIOs about, empathy and expressing vulnerability and that sort of thing. And you had some very interesting examples you were giving me about as part of remote leadership, how someone like you who is extroverted and likes to walk around and talk to people in person, and I mean, you're very personable. And how have you adapted to doing that sort of relating to other human beings over cameras?
So, I'm not sure that it was an overt decision or desire on my part, but as the situation went on, I realized that I was reverting more and more to trying to work exactly the same way as I did before, but in a remote environment, in a virtual environment. So in meetings, where previously you would have sometimes, the challenge or the opportunity to express some vulnerability about either something that was going on at work that was a particular challenge, or even something in your personal life. I personally chose to actually share those experiences online with the employee population, and although you cannot receive the same type of empathy and response and feedback that you would get in a room full of people, where you actually have the opportunity to in-depth look at the reactions, at the facial expressions,
To read the
at the
cues.
nuances in speech that come to you, that there was, to a certain degree, a similarity to that in the online environment, and that you just needed to let yourself expose to it, and then reap the results that came back. Challenging, but again, something that we adapted to, and that we had to make work, regardless of circumstance, because there was no alternative.
I want to pivot now over to, you had mentioned dealing with the SolarWinds cybersecurity problem, and that struck me as one of those, a great example of how the Department of Commerce and your new organization there among all the bureaus, how you deal with a major incident differently than perhaps it would have been dealt with a couple of years ago. Talk through that a little bit about how and what you did to respond to the SolarWinds breach.
So when that first came about, when I was first alerted to what had happened with one of our bureaus, we went through a very rapid analysis of the events and tried to decipher, the size and scope of the problem. And to me, as I kept hearing the details of what had happened from our vendors, from our staff, and from the intelligence community, it became absolutely obvious to me that this was an issue that was far larger than the bureau that had been affected. It was far larger than just the Department of Commerce. And it was even far larger than just the federal government. Because when you have a program, a piece of software, an implementation that is so ubiquitous throughout the entire computing world, a vulnerability in it assumes a scope and a potential impact that far exceeds any of the concerns that Andre Mendes might have about that particular bureau or the Department of Commerce. And so to me, it became crystal clear once that happened that we needed to declare a major incident.
Yes.
And so that's what we did in very short order. And I think that hopefully reaped benefits for everybody, because that rapid response allowed then for the situation to be escalated, and for the remediation and the protection and the minimization of damage took place very, very quickly across the entire environment.
Yeah.
And so, it's let's put it this way. Given the dichotomy between potentially overreacting a little bit to a major incident, or underreacting to what is potentially a global situation, I think going on the aggressive side of the response is probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's like I'll overreact now and apologize later.
It is, yeah.
Now, was that something where you had mentioned your cybersecurity, your task force, which had gotten underway? Initially, that was all CIOs and senior leaders, but at this point, it has essentially been run. It's run by all the chief security officers of the different bureaus and the department.
Yeah, the cyber task force came about later. It was
Oh, okay.
precipitated by this event,
Oh, all
but
right.
also precipitated by that availability of funding from Congress.
Mm-hmm.
We of course we have a CISO council,
Mm-hmm.
and that was already underway, but it was not as focused. The
Mm-hmm.
what the This incident originated and then was further strengthened by the EO, the executive order on zero trust architecture,
Mm-hmm.
was that it put an absolute focused light into the necessity for us to operate as an overall unit rather than deal with separate efforts. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how that came about. And the response from the CIOs and the CISOs was at first, a little bit cautious, but
Mm-hmm.
when they realized that this was, absolutely a pragmatic approach to dealing with these issues across the entire Department of Commerce, they fully embraced it, and the results have been spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, and a lot of this reminds me of one of your, I don't know how famous this quote is, but I've heard you say it a few times in interviews that one of the riskiest strategies a CIO can follow is to stay with the status quo. Where does that come from in terms of your management and leadership lessons over time, and how does that inform the way you're approaching your job today?
So that actually comes from my educational background in biology and evolutionary biology, right?
Mm-hmm.
The status quo, effectively, without evolutionary pressure, is ensuring that you're constantly decaying in your ability to respond to your environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for me, having an analysis of the end games and then establishing a North Star
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how you're going to migrate to accomplish those end games is the end all be all of technological evolution. And it is an extension of biological evolution. And so I think that there are great lessons to be learned from that in terms of agility and ability to adapt being the crucial part about not only surviving, but thriving in a very fast changing technological environment.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of staffing up and having the talent that you need for all these various efforts, that is and that may be one of those cliches about government service that is no longer true. But the difficulty of getting the top flight talent to work for government organizations, a lot has been written about that over the years. How does that look to you now? You have spent a good chunk of your career inside of government organizations, and you always seem to be doing pretty leading edge stuff. So how are you attracting and retaining talent these days? And tell us what that landscape looks like for you now.
I think one of the biggest wrong assumptions about government
Mm-hmm.
is about the quality of the individuals
Mm-hmm.
and their ability to become completely engaged into an environment and driving it forward. I have been exposed to exceptional talent inside of the federal government
Mm-hmm.
that is absolutely driven to achieve, very, very haughty goals by virtue of their dedication to public service. So that has been a very, very rewarding. Is it across the board? Is it 100% of the folks? Of course not. It never is.
Mm-hmm.
And it never is in the private sector. It never is in the nonprofit environment.
Mm-hmm.
There are always, the leaders, and there's always laggards. But what I found is that when given the proper, atmosphere of achievement, of accountability, but also of innovation, that the overall majority of the people that are in the technical arena and the IT arena
Mm-hmm.
are at their very core people that want to be iconoclastic. They want to be change agents. They want to pursue the latest and greatest. And so it is a marriage of having a good strategic plan, a good vision, and then putting it together with a recruiting message that makes people enthusiastic about joining you.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they joined, to be there, to be retained. Of course, training is an enormous part of that.
Yeah.
And when you talk about training, it is important that the training and your emphasis on that also mirrors your strategic direction, right? So for us, software as a service, and abstracting all of the lower layers of IT environments is an absolute priority, which means that we have to migrate these folks that have been doing system administration at a very granular level, server administration, network administration, that they are now prepared to run into the next layer of tasks that are far abstracted from the lower operational levels. And so we want to make sure that people can migrate into writing code, right, into doing analysis, into doing project management, that leverages both internal and external resources, and also in developing procurement abilities and understandings that in the federal government are so essential because of the regulatory environment associated with procurement, which is far more complicated than the private sector. And so once you offer people those opportunities, right, it is often, a little bit of a challenge in terms of, hey, you can no longer be administering servers that you've been administering for the past 20 years because we have none. They're gone. They're gone. The data centers are gone, right? They are somewhere out there provided by somebody else who specializes in that.
Yeah.
But I found that the folks that are truly enthusiastic about the mission understand that and can migrate into the new skill sets that are required and necessitated by the implementation of your strategic vision.
Well, and I can remember back, since you and I have known each other for so long, I can remember a decade ago, more than a decade ago, where you were talking about the importance of cloud as, the new infrastructure, the way to get out of all of these data centers and the legacy systems that were kind of weighing everybody down. So, and now here we are in 22, and cloud is very much accepted across the landscape. What is, when you think about emerging technologies, what is really interesting you these days? You were right about cloud a decade ago. You've certainly software as a service, that idea about abstracting to the application layer, the focus on customer and all those sort of things. What's next on your horizon when you look at the emerging technologies, the things that we should be talking more about more today, but 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, well, that was obvious, maybe.
So that is an interesting proposition, because I think that the trend for abstraction will continue ad infinitum until such time as organizations focus on only the applications that are specific to them and nothing else. Because all of the other issues have no additional value add to them, be they in the federal government, right, or be them in the private sector, where they have to focus on their competitors, on their markets, right? And so to me, that is going to be a continuing trend. The cybersecurity arena is an area where I think we're going to be experiencing massive change. Why is that? Ever since we started having computer environments, cybersecurity has been a concern. But it has never reached the apogee at which we find ourselves now, because systems were isolated. Mainframes were isolated, and to access them would require physical access, both in person or from a physical element, let's say a cable that was connected to this. All of a sudden, we are dealing with an environment where the Internet of Things is effectively a reality, right? And so to me, the next challenge is going to be the fact that humans are going to become part of the Internet of Things.
Oh, interesting.
That we are going to be looking at more and more. The physical aspect of being a human being is going to be used for identity, for access control, at a granularity level that we've never experienced before. And this is by virtue of social evolution and cultural evolution. And so, people talk about the chip implants and all of that.
I was thinking about that.
I think that is going to be, to a large degree, a reality sooner than people expect. Because we really can't rely on anything else to establish an identity. But then the identity itself is going to have a component on the other side of the equation, because individuals change, individuals evolve. And although it is a little bit scary, I think that not only are we going to have zero trust architecture, where we establish that an individual is actually indeed eligible to enter that system, to work, to make that transaction, everything else, but on the other side of the equation, a constant renewal of the reputation of that individual to continue to do those functions, but almost on a real-time basis. It's a scary proposition. But if you think about it, one of the components of zero trust architecture is to establish the identity of the individual and therefore the eligibility to do certain things. But we always have the insider threat problem that you could have an individual that is absolutely authorized to do something, right? But whose ability to pursue nefarious activities is totally independent of the fact that he or she is trusted. And then we get into an environment where we have to constantly reevaluate that trust. Now, this is something that is that is scary. That is scary because you're talking about almost the equivalent of a social score on a constant basis. That is going to be driving, very fast and granular interactions and approvals in terms of access to systems, and that is going to be an enormous challenge because culturally it's going to go against some of our most firmly held beliefs in terms of privacy, some of our most firmly held beliefs in terms of independence, but that will be necessitated by the constant evolution of the environment.
Yes. Now, you'd mentioned that your original training was in evolutionary biology. Do you still read a lot in the sciences? How do you keep yourself updated and up to date on emerging technologies and where science is heading and this sort of thing?
Every day.
Really?
There are a set of topics, a set of websites, a set of publications that I follow on a daily basis. And what I found is that more and more they create an ecosystem, an environment where everything is related. And so to me, that's still one of the most fascinating aspects of our societal and cultural evolution is the fact that some long-held beliefs and knowledge continues to be reaffirmed on a daily basis by virtue of the way that the society is evolving, right? It is not that difficult to imagine our current society evolving into was portrayed in science fiction in the 50s, in the 60s by visionaries that combined all of the sciences, the natural sciences, into a vision of a universe to which we are rapidly migrating. And so I find great comfort in knowing what some of those end games are by virtue of that broader spectrum of knowledge acquisition and retention and updating that gives you that insight. Okay. I think that one of the dangers of being too focused on one environment is that sometimes you fail to realize that the societal, cultural, scientific, biological, astral, influences on that environment extend way beyond what you are looking at in a very definite and focused environment. It's we need in-depth subject matter experts, but when those in-depth subject matter experts fail to realize all of the issues that are affecting the universe in which they deal with, that can become quite a dangerous proposition.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned talent and subject matter expertise, and that has come up a lot in our conversation. And are there new approaches that you're using that either the Department of Commerce or the bureaus have been collaborating on to attract more of this talent? Because the way, the days of going to university job fairs have pretty much ended. And I remember a lot of CIOs told me when the pandemic was first underway, they said, this is so amazing. I can recruit from anywhere now because I don't have to get them to come into the headquarters buildings. But of course, everybody was in that same situation. So have you seen, has that helped? Have you seen it? Do you take a different approach now in the way you and your bureaus are trying to attract talented technologists into federal service?
Well, I mean, the net is cast very, very wide now for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
All of the issues associated with being able to have remote work that gives you access to a completely new population,
It
right?
does.
To the issues of diversity that are front and center now, but for my organizations have been a long-standing standard that needed to be abided by. And so, my friend, at the end of the day, it's still, I personally still rely on the fact that whenever we're going to hire somebody to a senior position, I want to interview that person as the last step. Okay? Because I want to understand the motivation. I want to understand the adaptability. I want to understand the flexibility and the intellectual curiosity associated with that individual that is going to allow he or she to come in and completely, upgrade the environment by virtue of their presence, right? And this is on an individual basis, the ability to work with others and everything else, but also, that intellectual curiosity that propels innovation, right?
Yes.
I'm never going to hire somebody that is, incredibly skilled, but when asked why they want to work for the Department of Commerce, tells me that it's because their commute's going to be a little shorter. Right. And I've had people tell me that, or that they're looking for, getting to the next grade level.
Yeah.
Those are not the things that are interesting, to us in terms of getting people on board. And I think we've been very successful in attracting and retaining the kind of individuals that take you to the next level, that bring to the table, maybe a little different angle of view into an environment that is less status quo, that is less established knowledge, and more about expanding the boundaries of that particular job or that particular job description. And so it's a constant search for talent. We're competing with the private sector, where they have all kinds of tests that they apply on a constant basis, psychotechnic tests, psychological tests, performance tests, right? That are designed to unearth those innovators, those people capable of the next level of operations. But that has not prevented us from finding some remarkable gems, right? And continuing to move forward. Again, I think there are an enormous amount of really, really talented people that are very interested in being part of a solution that is larger than themselves. And I think that the federal government offers that type of opportunity by virtue of what we do and our role in providing services to the citizenry. And in the United States, that takes on a whole different dimension, because we're such an influential country that not only are we affecting our local communities, our local regions, our local country, but also in a lot of ways driving the standards for the rest of the world. And I think that is very, very enticing, certainly very enticing to me.
Yes.
Because the impact is then global, and that is so amazing.
Yeah, that is consequential, as you would say, right?
Yes.
Yes. I was just this morning, I was speaking with the CIO of a very, very large banking company, and he was pointing out how important it is for them to get across their mission and their purpose, in terms of funding communities and helping people build their finances and that sort of thing. And we spent a lot of time talking about purpose and mission. And this is, a big bank, a big financial services company. So that understanding, I see that across CIOs in a whole lot of different industries, that having a mission, having a purpose, having something consequential you're doing, especially if you're looking to attract, not people that are looking for a great retirement package, but are Gen Z or millennials and are really looking for that ability to change the world in some way.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's always been there to a certain degree, right? It has always been there, but it has taken on a new strength, a new life, because we are now so much more aware of circumstances throughout the world on an immediate basis by virtue of social media, by virtue of video that is ubiquitous and available immediately. That in a large way, we have stopped looking at our own belly buttons as sort of the universe. We have stopped looking at just our family as the universe. The universe is far broader than that. And when you have, I don't know, I think that most people, given the opportunity, want to do good.
Yeah, I
Most
think
people,
people
given the
rise to
opportunity,
the occasion is
they rise to
what
the
I
occasion.
find, and I know that you saw that when you came into the DOC a little more than 2 years ago, I guess 2.5 years, and
Correct.
saw all of the shifting and the changing that had to happen across the various bureaus and leadership. This is a great place to pivot into talking a little bit more about servant leadership. I know that that's a concept that has always been very important to you. Years ago, I remember seeing you do a presentation. I think you called it the CIO Call of Duty, and that was probably more about using. It was kind of using your power of the helicopter view for more good, for ways to drive the business forward. Talk about that a little bit, about how long, because this is not something new to you, but I hear it a lot more these days when I talk to CIOs, that idea, the concept of servant leadership. What does it mean to you?
Well, to me, working for an organization that has a purpose, right? And therefore, creates value that extends past just its shareholders and immediate stakeholders, has always been very enticing. And I found that when you dedicate your life to service and to the betterment of the human condition, that tends to open up tremendous opportunities, and that allows you to be consequential. And so it has always been very important to me. I've always wanted to select an environment where I didn't know much about what they were doing, right? But by virtue of coming on board with a fresh view, right, I could ask all of the stupid questions that nobody that was on board dared to ask or thought about asking, because they were so steeped into their working environment. And so by virtue of doing that, you can ask the questions that prompt actual change, not only to that organization, but often to the industry itself. And if that change to the industry itself turns into benefit to the overall community, then effectively, by leading, you become a servant of a greater purpose, because you enable new paradigms, new ways of operating that are sometimes radically different and far more effective. And in the pharmaceutical industry, we saw that. At PBS, we saw that with a dramatically new paradigm for handling content, and that can be adapted to everything. It can be adapted to everything, because it is amazing how consequential the work in a small organization with a specific with a specific purpose can spread across an entire industry by virtue of competition. And so you affect a very large number of people. And if the industry in which you're operating is an industry that has a greater purpose in life, that can be a game changer across the entire globe. And so that's what I call servant leadership, because effectively you're leading into a better place for the human condition.
When you think about, the coming year for 22 and even 23, when you imagine the influence and the accomplishments that you can get to and through for the Department of Commerce, what do you hope to see? What will the people that are watching what your bureaus and your part of the government is doing, what will they see in terms of a big priority or a really strategic move? Is there anything? And of course, if it's top secret, feel free to tell us all about it here.
So when I first came on board, I laid down a marker that I would like to see the Department of Commerce, by virtue of the importance of its bureaus and the work that it does, become the leader in technological transformation across the federal government, right? And that process does not take place overnight, right? You get into an environment, and there is a certain set of circumstances, and in order to get to that next level, you have to take care of all of those things that bring no value whatsoever, but that are impeding your rapid progress. And so over the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of cleanup of that stuff. But as we're doing that, we're effectively increasing our agility and our ability to do rapid deployments. And that is sort of a synergistic situation where it is an accelerant. In other words, agility becomes the combustion that is going to allow you to achieve escape velocity, right? To achieve escape velocity so that you get away from the old paradigms and you start operating in a different level.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's going to be about seeing that drag that constantly drags operations. After all, across the federal government, I believe right now, still 60 to 70% of all expenses are just for operations and maintenance.
The keeping the lights on. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so moving that percentage from 60 to 40 means that the other part went from 40 to 60, right? And you can continue to evolve that situation so that it continues to provide greater and greater flexibility, greater and greater acceleration, and your ability to totally change the paradigm. Customer experience, all right? There's just been an executive order in terms of customer experience. For better or for worse, when you're spending 60 to 70% on O&M, you cannot put the type of resources into that layer of interface with your clientele. Yeah, right. Whether you are the IRS, whether you're the patent office, whether you're the census, right? Where you achieve a seamless interaction and relationship with your clients, right? That is far more productive. That is easier on them. That provides value in terms of simplicity, in terms of completeness and accuracy of information, in terms of access to information in such a way that it is very easy to find and very easy to leverage, right? And so for us, it's going to be a continuous effort to create those embers of innovation, right? By virtue of getting rid of all of the jetsam and flotsam of O&M. That is going to continue, right? Yeah. And all under an umbrella of cybersecurity. Because, if you're down or if you're hacked, you're no good for anybody. So that creates a protective bubble around all of our systems, right? And that allows us to not have to worry about that because, it has been well taken care of with the migration to zero trust architecture, and then the eventual migration to some of the other protocols that I briefly talked about that will drive, human interaction with computer systems. Yes. And so it is never a big bang approach. Okay. It is always evolutionary. And when you go through an evolutionary process, the time frame between a cycle of innovation and the value that it brings to the table is constantly being reduced, right? It took hundreds of millions of years to get from a unicellular organism into a mammal. But then from the mammal into Homo sapiens sapiens was a much shorter period of time, and the results that it brought to the table far exponentially larger in terms of the evolution of mankind, right? And so that is going to continue, and we got to make sure that we're ready for that next layer of innovation to come faster and faster and faster, because you're spending less and less time thinking about the fact that, in our particular case, there are mitochondria in our cells that are currently working very hard so that we can do what you and I are doing. Yes. Right? Nobody thinks about that anymore. Good. Well, let's get to the next layer.
Well, I always find that you are thinking very deeply about a lot of these issues. So this has really been, it's always fascinating talking with you, Andre, and I've really enjoyed this. And I wonder if you remember when we talked just, I think last week, you said there were 3 words that you want on your tombstone. Not that we want to think ahead to your tombstone, but do you remember what those were? The 3.
Oh, absolutely.
Essentially your 3. What are those 3 words?
So, thoughtful, pragmatic, and consequential. And so, and it's funny, Mary Van, because here we're talking about tombstones. Wow, a little bit morbid. But here's the reality. That question was put to me by a teacher of mine in a morals and religion class in Portugal in the 5th grade. Wow. And he asked us all to write what we thought would be the best words to have on your tombstone.
Yeah.
So he's asking 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds about this. It was remarkably insightful on his part because it made us think about what really was important in life. And so I owe him a big debt of gratitude for having that insight, because it has become a driving force for my entire life.
Do you remember what you wrote down when you were a 9-year-old?
No, those are the things I wrote down.
When you were 9 years old?
That's correct.
All right.
Well, I might have been 10 at the time.
All right. Well, sometimes you are positively frightening, Andre.
No.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you again for joining us today. It has absolutely been great talking with you, and I really appreciate all the time you put into this, but also all the thoughtful thinking behind it. So thanks so much.
Well, Mary Fran, it's always a pleasure. And I've told you before, I'll say it in front of everybody. It is amazing how consequential you have been in my career. And I've always found you to be incredibly thoughtful and ultimately pragmatic. So,
well, thank you so much. I'm just going to float right out of the studio now. All right. You have a wonderful day. If you have joined us late and are sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I could have seen that entire interview, do not worry. This is going to be my interview with Andre Mendez is going to be here on LinkedIn through the rest of today, and then will also be very quickly available on CIO.com and also on YouTube's IDG Tech Talk channel. CIO Leadership Live also shows up on all of your popular podcast platforms as an audio podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today as much as I did with CIO Andre Mendez of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and that you will join us back here again next time when I will return on Monday, February 7th, and we will hear from CIO Scott Case of Truist Bank. Thanks again for joining us today, and please take a moment to find and subscribe, if you haven't, to our free channel, IDG Tech Talk, where you can find all of the 70-plus previous episodes of CIO Leadership Live. In case you're facing the weekend with nothing to binge watch, we invite you to binge watch CIO Leadership Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay well and safe out there, and we'll see you next time.